Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Norman Lebrecht is a distinguished writer, cultural commentator, music journalist, broadcaster, founder of the widely read website Slip Disc. Oh, and so many other things. I can't continue. His columns have appeared regularly in the Daily Telegraph, The Spectator, the Wall Street Journal, among other prestigious publications, and his broadcasts on the BBC are immensely popular. He has authored some of the most authoritative books on classical music, whether it is Weimar, which offers his fascinating insights into one of the most remarkable musical minds of the 20th century, which we hope we shall hear about in a future lecture, and on the amusing book of musical anecdotes. Mr. Lebrecht is also widely known for writing about classical music today. It is our great pleasure to welcome him to the NCPA for the spring season of the Symphony Orchestra of India. Our members and friends of the orchestra and the music-loving community at large will be delighted to know that he will be giving 2 talks during the season. He has rightly suggested the important aspect of introducing great classical music through permanent orchestras in the cities of India for his first lecture. This is a subject of absolute necessity, and he will respond to it on why we need orchestras and how an orchestra defines a city. His second talk on the 16th of February is called Why Beethoven, which is also the title of his book published in 2023 on the great composer who redefined classical music. Landscape from the 19th century onwards. It is a cultural commentary on the phenomenon called Beethoven, and Mr. Lebrecht declares in his prologue, Why Beethoven? A statement, not a question. May we now please welcome Mr. Lebrecht and ask him for his talk.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I've been waiting a long time for this. 49 years ago, I was on a flight to Hong Kong, and in those days, you couldn't fly from London to Hong Kong without refueling somewhere. And they stopped in Delhi, New Delhi, for refueling, but they wouldn't let us off the plane because we didn't have Indian visas. So I'm stuck on Indian soil, but unable to put my foot on it. And I thought, well, at some point or another, I'm going to have to come back. It's taken 49 years, Khusru, but I'm so thrilled to be here. What was I doing in Hong Kong? Some of this is a little bit a touch seedy, so those of delicate disposition may wish to cover their ears. I was working in television news at that time, and I was organizing film coverage for television for a number of major companies, BBC, NBC, CBC, ABC, and so forth. And we had a conference of Asian and Pacific broadcasters in Hong Kong. When I got there, I found that as the youngest delegate, I was deputed to do after-dinner duties. Yeah, you can see where this is going, right? After dinner, I was supposed to be taking the Australian and the Japanese executives on a tour of the topless bars. And I won't go into too much detail because really, I mean, I don't want any of this to appear in my biography. But it was hard work. It was particularly hard work looking after the Australian executives, I can tell you. And the next morning, having them make a call home to their wives and say, look, Norman Lebrecht will tell you I was in bed by 10 o'clock last night. On the third night, I was wiped out. I was exhausted. I made my excuses. I went up to my room, locked the door, turned on the television. There were two channels, English in those days in Hong Kong, English and Chinese. But I've been told that if you hung the aerial out of the window and you pointed the television itself at a certain angle, you might just be able to pick up Beijing TV. And then, we're talking 1977, Beijing was still, the forbidden city. We didn't know what went on there. So I did as instructed. I hung the aerial out of the window. I turned on the television. I turned it around. And there in front of my eyes was an orchestra. Remember, this is 1977. It's still the Cultural Revolution. All Western culture and civilization has been banned in China. There is an orchestra, and there is a conductor coming on stage and picking up a baton and giving the unmistakable 2/4 beat of the opening of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. I am completely gobsmacked. Grab a coat, run downstairs. My Australian and Japanese executives are still around the bar in the hotel. They haven't managed to get themselves out yet. They're still around the bar. And I said to them, guys, listen, we're just witnessing history up there. Cultural Revolution is over. They said, what are you on about? I said, they're playing Beethoven on Beijing TV. And one of them looked at me, with that weary eye that people of a certain age can look at a young puppy in his 20s. So nobody ever changed political direction with Beethoven. I look in newspapers next morning, nothing. I look at newspapers the next few weeks, nothing. Nobody has picked this up. But now we know, with the benefit of hindsight and with testimonies coming out of China, that this was the turning point, and that the Chinese had chosen that day, 27th of March, 1977, 150th anniversary of Beethoven's death, to tell the world that the Cultural Revolution is over, that China is embarking on a new direction, China is re-embracing civilization, and is using an orchestra to make that point and to make that statement. The orchestra, in that moment, represents the new China, and to an extent still does. 40 years on, I'm in Shanghai for a conference of Asian and Pacific orchestras, wearing a different hat. And someone from Beijing gets up, takes the stand, and says, in China now, we have 46 orchestras. By the end of the decade, we will have 100. 100 symphony orchestras in China. As it is, they're probably a couple short. There are about 96 at the moment. The last one was started last year. But every couple of years, they're starting a full symphony orchestra in China, and they're training young people, and there's absolutely no shortage of young people who are good enough to get into an orchestra. And with every new industrial area and every new city has 20 million people, they have an orchestra for them. They also have, it is estimated, it's very very difficult to prove this, they also have 50 million young people taking private piano lessons. Not at school, because they don't teach it at school. They're taking private piano lessons, and the parents are scraping together however many yuan it takes to buy a piano for the flat. And I didn't believe this until once when I was in China, in Shanghai. My colleague said to me, come with me. And we went to one of the new apartment blocks that were going up. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The kids had just come home from school. You cannot imagine the cacophony that came from 40 blocks of this building, from 40 apartments in this building where the children were all practicing piano. Chopin would have died on the spot. What the Chinese had grasped, before any of us, is that an orchestra represents us. It is who we are. An orchestra is a way to signal that this is a properly functioning society. It's a society in which people can work together, can challenge each other, and can transcend the day-to-day in order to create an organism that represents the city, the society, and the country. In India at the moment, there is the Symphony Orchestra of India, but that's just the beginning. We'll come to it. I'll just spend a little time at looking at the evolution of this concept of how we are defined by an orchestra, how an orchestra tells us who we are. Where does the orchestra begin? Well, I mean, if you want to go back to biblical times, probably the first inkling that there may have been an orchestra is when the children of Israel come out of Egypt and they're gathered by the Red Sea, and the Red Sea splits. They're being pursued by the most powerful army in the world. Children of Israel go through onto the safe side, and then Pharaoh's army comes along, the sea closes in on them, end of that. They're standing on the other side, they don't know what to do, and Moses leads them in song, spontaneously breaks into song. Okay. And then what does the scripture say? It says Miriam, the prophetess, sister of Moses, takes the timbrels and the drums and the other instruments that she has, and she and the women strike up, and they start singing on their own. But they're not singing a cappella like the men. They've got their own orchestra. And you have to wonder, how did that happen? How did they bring these instruments out of Egypt into the desert when Scripture tells us they left in a hurry? They left at night. Pharaoh had said, get out, get out, get out. Take whatever you can, just get out. And the women said, we're not leaving without our instruments. They understood that if they're going to spend 40 years in the desert or whatever, somebody's going to have to make music. And singing a cappella is not going to be enough. So these are the beginnings. But the independent beginnings of an orchestra, the idea of an orchestra as a self-generated mechanism and a self-controlling mechanism, is actually quite recent. We're talking less than 200 years. We're talking 1840, 1842. When in 3 cities, groups of musicians, disaffected musicians, say, we don't want to carry on working at the day job, or if you do carry on working at the day job, we need some kind of relief in order that we can control what we do. So the musicians in Vienna, they all worked for the court, they worked for the emperor, they played in the opera house, they were bored, they were murmurous, they were unhappy with their work, and they wanted to give concerts, and a few people who were known as the Friends of Music formed a Gesellschaft der Musikfreunde, and said, okay, look, we'll raise some funds and you give philharmonic concerts and you will be known as the Vienna Philharmonic. And so it goes to this day. The same year in New York, there were a lot of unemployed musicians who'd come from Europe. There was a society that formed, a Philharmonic Society. They gave the first American performance of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Nobody liked it very much. They didn't play it again for a decade. But they, on the same principles, they started this Philharmonic Society. The third, is Ed here? No, because I put a Liverpudlian element into this, Ed, for you to correct me. We'll come to Liverpool in a second, okay? What does it mean to be the Philharmonic Orchestra of Vienna? What is the nub of that concept? Think back 5 weeks, New Year's Day. What happened then? Could we have the first clip? just a tempter. That's what it means for an orchestra to represent a society. Every year, on the new year, something like a quarter of the world television audience tunes in to the Vienna Philharmonic to bring in the new year for them. Vienna Philharmonic has been an exclusive group of musicians who govern their own concerts and programs and membership very, very rigorously. They take no direction from the outside. They've sacked some really distinguished musicians, starting with Gustav Mahler, and they are what they are because they know that they represent Vienna more than any of its other elements, more than schnitzels, more than strudels, more than Gustav Klimt, more than the opera, more than anything you could possibly imagine about Vienna, even more than the double cream you get on your strudel when you go and have a little snack on the Kärtner Straße. If you ask people all around the world, what is Vienna, they will say the Philharmonic on New Year's Day. That is the emblem. That is what it takes to define society. Liverpool, so interesting. 1840. We didn't have any orchestras in England. I mean, England was this big empire. Didn't have an orchestra. Not Manchester, not London, not Birmingham, nowhere. Beginning of the Industrial Revolution, there were some people who were getting to be quite prosperous. And in Liverpool, always a city of very mixed origins. There has always been a Chinese community in Liverpool. There's been an Indian community, the people from all over the world. And in Liverpool, they said, people said, well, yep, let's start an orchestra, amateur at first, and when we can afford it, we'll pay them. and that is how the Liverpool Philharmonic, now the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic, was founded in 1840. Within about a decade or so, they'd raised enough money to build a Philharmonic hall. Liverpool had a hall, a proper concert hall, before almost any other city. And down the years, they've managed to maintain this musical representation in a way that is so strong that it is impossible to imagine that without the Philharmonic, there could ever have been the Beatles. Because the Beatles grew up on an awareness of there being the Phil, the place where they made music, the place how they made music. So if you look at how music came about, not just classical music, but popular music as well, it starts with the Philharmonic Hall, with the Liverpool Philharmonic. So these are how orchestras tell us who they are and generate an awareness of what music can suggest and what it can mean in society. And it's something that I have chosen to study down many years, and I'm continually amazed at how vital it is and how little we are aware of the role that an orchestra plays. Because what's happening here? You have 100, 120 skilled technicians, people who have been trained to the point of despair, whose fingers ache every day of their working lives, but whose model is to work together with others in that position, with, if you like, fellow sufferers, but also fellow strivers, because their aim is every day to be better, to become better, to make a better society, to make better music, and to represent the values of the society in which they live. It hasn't always worked well. We move on to the next phase. It takes 40 years before this model of the independent orchestra moves into its next phase. It's not as though there's a great rush and people say, yes, we all want one, we're going to. So I'm not in despair that India has only one orchestra. India, in its own time, will have plenty. 40 years later, in Berlin, there is a group of rebellious musicians, and they're working for a conductor, hired by a conductor. They don't like the conductor. They say, No, no. We're going to start a philharmonic orchestra of our own. We're going to call it the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra. And in order to distinguish ourselves from all that has gone before, we're going to get the most famous and difficult conductor in the world. And his name is Hans von Bülow. Bülow was, as we ringing many bells here? Bülow was the man who conducted Tristan and Isolde for Richard Wagner, while Richard Wagner was having a child with his wife. This was another unseemly episode, and not for those of delicate disposition, so I'll pass over it very quickly. But Bülow, having lost his wife to Wagner, became an increasingly irascible character, but also one who could magnetize an orchestra, magnetize musicians, focus them on their task, and also discipline audiences. My favorite Bülow story, he'd taken the Berlin Philharmonic and he'd performed Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in Hamburg, and everybody jumps up and they're applauding, and Bülow turns to the audience and said, "You haven't understood a thing, lock the doors, we're going to do it again." Martin, we don't see enough of that nowadays. What has the Berlin Philharmonic done in taking Hans von Bülow as its first chief conductor? It has created the model of a star-led orchestra, of an orchestra with a figurehead who is going to be recognized by the public far beyond their normal audiences. And Bülow, in the short time that was left for him, he died a few years later, established that orchestra as the premium orchestra, the orchestra that you had to go to because you didn't know what he was going to make them do next, or what he was going to encourage them to do next. And when Bülow died, who did they get? They get another character from the Wagner orchestra in Bayreuth, and his name is Arthur Nikisch. Nikisch, possibly the most fascinating character in the history of conducting, a man with these huge liquescent eyes who would hypnotize the audience as he did the orchestra. And in the tricky 5/4 movement of Tchaikovsky's Fifth, he would lay down his baton on the stand and conduct the orchestra with his eyes alone. How dangerous is that? Well, the idea of orchestra and conductor taking on a star quality, because that is what we're talking about, began right then, and it spread then around the world during that decade. During the 80s, the Concertgebouw started in Amsterdam and various others around the world. It was the 20th century before London had an independent orchestra, which was the London Symphony Orchestra. And once again, it was a group of musicians who didn't like their conductor and organizer, Henry Wood, and they formed their own orchestral society, and they got Nikisch and they got Richter to conduct them. One more thing about Nikisch, because it's the story of his death, and it's not very well known. Nikisch was dying in Leipzig in 1924 at a time of great turbulence in Germany. There was inflation, there was the whole of society was disintegrating, and there was a general strike, and all of the electricity workers had come out. And Nikisch was in hospital and he was on life support, and they went to see the general secretary of the electricity workers and said, "Look, could you make the exception, because Maestro Nikisch is unwell and the hospital needs more power." They called off the strike. That is to tell you what an orchestra can mean to a society. It's not the conductor. It's not just for Nikisch. It's for everything Nikisch represented. It's for everything the Leipzig Gewandhaus represented. That it brought people together. It brought a fractured society together, and fractious. In that moment, in that week of Nikisch's death, to celebrate the orchestra and to offer gratitude to the orchestra for everything that it was bringing to the world. These are the things that orchestras do. and it's why we still need them. And I see going around the world, much less than I used to, thank goodness, because airports are horrible, but just how much it means. If you're in America and you happen to go to Detroit or particularly Cleveland, these are Rust Belt cities. These were cities that were built on great industries that don't exist anymore, and they are large parts of the city are laid waste, and they're in great poverty. I remember sitting in the garden of the orchestra manager in Cleveland, and I'm hearing little pops, and I say, "Are they fireworks?" He said, "No, it's shootings in the next street." Yes, these are dangerous cities, and to an extent, cities to which you emerge at your peril. But in both of those cities, their pride is focused on the orchestra, because the orchestra is what's going to represent them to the world. The excellence of the orchestra, the aspiration of the orchestra, the hard work of the orchestra, the notion that somewhere in the middle of Cleveland, in the middle of really not a very pleasant place, there are 120 musicians sitting there rehearsal and playing as if their lives depended on it, not for themselves because their livelihoods depended on it, but for the society, to raise Cleveland once again to what it was. So the orchestra is this necessity. It is this, it's a model for a working society, because it shows how we can live together, how we can work together, how we can inspire each other, how we can create a leadership model so that we appoint a conductor, a leader, a music director, an artistic director who can bring about change. I'm so glad Ed Smith is here tonight, because that's what he did in Birmingham, together with another young chap from Liverpool. Nobody's heard of him since, called Simon Rattle. But they were these two young men in their 20s who in 1980 went to Birmingham, and Birmingham was borderline Rust Belt. Birmingham was falling apart. It once had a car industry, and the car industry was going away. And there was terrible social conflict. There were strikes all over. There was a city at odds with itself. And these two young men from Liverpool, who had seen what an orchestra could do in their hometown, in Liverpool, brought that to Birmingham, and brought Birmingham to the centre of cultural attention, so much so that within about 5 years, the funding authorities in England were saying, "How much can we give you?" You know, they were saying, "We'll make you the first £1 million orchestra." But they were more sensible than that. And their planning was tremendous, and they created the best concert hall in England. They created 17 years of extraordinary music making. And even now, what they did is enabling Birmingham to think about, to aspire to how the city can be at its best, because it was the orchestra that represented the city at its best. I'm going to give you one more musical example, because it's one very, very close to my heart. And it's to do with India, and it's to do with a piece of music with which I think you're all going to be familiar. In fact, it is probably the piece by a European composer that has been heard by more people than any other work of music. Well, let's listen to it and then give you the idea. Okay, Richard. Come here. You all know what that is, right? Okay, it is the signal identifier of all India radio. But do you know how it came about? Some might. I was writing a chapter in my next book about how difficult it is to write a theme tune, to write something that identifies a program on radio or television, or most difficult of all, to identify a radio or television station when it's not playing on air, so that you know where you've landed and you're on the right station. Less important now than it used to be, but still very important. And the BBC had all sorts of issues with this, and there are all sorts of papers written about it. You may know BBC World Service, yes? They took that from the 17th century. They didn't know where to go. In the early days of All India Radio, they needed something that would say India. And it was really tricky, because how do you represent a country with 28 languages, with a population that is Hindu and Muslim and Buddhist and Zoroastrian and all sorts of other things, that is still under British rule, and so it can't in any way, it can't sound English at all. So we need, first of all, the most un-English music you've ever heard, the least divisive music you've ever heard, and yet something that says unity, working together, being together, coming together. So when All India Radio started, it was mostly staffed by ex-BBC people, and they bounced this problem from one desk to the next, as they do in the BBC still today, probably more so. And who is actually going to be landed with this task of writing the signal for All Indian Radio? And a young man arrived from Berlin. It's 1934. His name is Walter Kaufmann, and he's married to the niece of Franz Kafka. He has been at one time the assistant to the conductor Bruno Walter. He is absolutely steeped in the European symphonic tradition, but he has to get out of Germany because he's Jewish, and he's Czech, and they're throwing him out anyway. But he's made an Indian friend, one of the early film producers of what is now Bollywood, who said, come to Bombay, and we will find work for you. Don't worry about a thing. So he came, not speaking any English either, which can't have been easy. And as this little time bomb is bouncing around desks of former BBC officials at All India Radio, it lands on his desk, and they say, Kaufmann, write us a theme for All India Radio. And he thought for a little bit and said, when do you need it? And they said, this afternoon. He said, okay. And what he produced here was a sound that is simultaneously Indian in its instrumentation, but Central European in its melody. There are traces of Janacek there. That is almost a Janacek. You could almost hear Yenufa in that tune. And there is an awareness of symphonic structure, of musical structure, and he pins that onto All India Radio, and 1.47 billion Indians wake up every morning in the awareness that this is what signifies them, this is their emblem, and that their emblem goes back to an orchestral tradition, to an idea of orchestra, to an idea that music can bring us together, can make us work together, can elevate us above our assumptions of what we can do on our own, and can make us more challenged, more aware of what it is and why it is that we live this life on earth. So when I hear that India has just the Symphony Orchestra of India, I think, no, that's just the beginning. India is on the threshold of something much greater. Thank you so much.
Incidentally, the violinist was Zubin's father.
The violinist in that clip was Zubin's father. Yes, of course, because Kaufmann played in the string quartet of Mele Mehta, and he was in at the foundation of the first orchestra here in Bombay, as it was then. He stayed until 1946. Then he went to England and didn't do very well at all. Went to Canada and founded the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra.
Mm. Yes, that's. Would you like any questions?
Yeah, first of all, from you.
Well, from you, yes. Well, thank you, Norman. Fascinating. We learned a lot of things. Yes, Vienna is the only city in the world which is, in my view, civilized, because they put the arts on the front page and the politicians on the back page.
Yeah.
Pardon me, anybody. I think they are prouder, you're right, of their orchestra rather than the schnitzel or the cake in the Imperial. And the whole city sings. The trams sing, even when you get into that wretched air, what's the aeroplane called? The Austrian Airs.
Austrian airline.
And I used to fly sometimes from Vienna to Japan. You heard the Blue Danube about 20 times. And that was, yes. But it's still a great tune.
Of course it is.
Yes.
And the Danube still isn't blue.
And the Danube is still in blue. Right, quite right. I would like to thank all the people over here who are supporting our orchestra. Pardon me, I've got a bad. And, of course, my friend Marat over there. Without him, we wouldn't have started. We were walking back to our apartment in London when we saw this advertisement of a Kazakh team playing in St. James Church on Piccadilly. We didn't have anything to do, so we walked in, and there are these lovely young Kazakh ladies playing the violin, and with this rather dynamic young gentleman leading them. And they played Vivaldi like Italians. They played Tchaikovsky like Russians. And so this is a great team. And we went backstage and we asked them to, whether they'd like to come to Bombay. We said, what's in Bombay? He says, well, try. And they did come. And thereby hangs a tale. They came with the young ladies. We had a wonderful, wonderful founder called Dr. Jamshid Baba, who was very perceptive. And he was the brother of Dr. Homi Baba, who at one time might have won the Nobel Prize in line for science. He was in the same group as Niels Bohr and several people like Einstein. And he looked and he says, they play well. They also look nice. I think you should call them back. And that's how we started. And he brought his orchestra. And one day sitting in our apartment, we said, Marat, what about starting a symphony orchestra? He says, you must be crazy. I said, of course I am. Anyway, we came back, we had this auditions, it's an old story. Everybody knows. And we gradually started with the condition that in a few years there must be a lot of Indians in the orchestra. We can't just import everybody all the time. Although Europe has started doing that with Asia now. So we started this, and it's our 20th year now. And you can see that it's not in bad shape. And we've got some extremely reasonably good conductors. And there's Martin, who's going to be introduced as a chief conductor. We've had Dutoit, and we've had Zubin, of course, and we've had many good conductors. Also the great Yuri Simonov, who once, after a rehearsal of the Verdi Requiem, came into my room and he said, "Господин, do you have a Kalashnikov?" I said, "I don't keep Kalashnikovs in my room." "No, if you had, I would tell you which members of your orchestra you should shoot." So we did have characters. Yes, we had a lot of fun in between, but it's a long story. But I would like to thank you for describing to us in specific detail the importance of a orchestra in the reputation of a city. I think that Philadelphia is better known for its orchestra than for anything else. I think, I don't know. I don't know what else they do.
They're still working it out.
They're still working it out, yeah. And so here we are wanting to create this great institution in the name of the Tata Group, which is supporting us. And of course, we leave it all open to all of you to ask questions from Mr. Norman, because you've heard it all from me, and I don't want to bore you again. So let's open it.
I want to thank you for proving that you're just one single person, because when I read your book, particularly the one on 20th century music, the encyclopedia, I was convinced it could not be the work of a single person. And I thought, I'll see a troop of people addressing us. You're just one. I'm reminded of the very many wonderful anecdotes which are not available anywhere else, including the part where you say that atmospheric music is often played in shareholders' meetings to reconcile people to the retrenchments which are about to follow. Having said my little piece, the question is, when is a book on the rest other than the 20th century in encyclopedic form coming out from you?
Thank you very much for your kind words. Well, I mean, the 20th century is an infant. It's only a quarter of the way gone. There are some interesting things that are happening. I think, ask me in 10 years' time. I think we'll get a keener idea where we're going.
Before the 20th century.
Oh, before. Well, the next book is called Why Music, and the final chapter is indeed about Walter Kaufmann and India. I should say, we were talking. Sorry, just one second. But you mentioned Philadelphia. One of the shocks of John F. Kennedy when he became president in the White House, and he was looking at demographic trends and the things that Americans did with their leisure, was he discovered more Americans go to symphony concerts than to baseball and basketball combined. This was 1960. And this so horrified him that he invited Igor Stravinsky and his wife over for a sleepover. Probably the first composers to spend a night at the White House. But there is, within any well-organized society, within any society that is self-aware and ambitious, there has to be an orchestra that takes it to the next stage. Sorry, you were...
Yeah, I was going to ask, when was the first time that you heard orchestral music, and how did that ignite your passion for orchestral music?
Probably as a kid, about 8 years old, at the festival hall, and I think Klemperer was conducting the Philharmonia. I'd been taken there by somebody who was about to become my stepmother, and for whom I evinced the most complete loathing. And she would take me to opera as well, and I really, my two most hated operas were her two favorites. But the one thing that stuck was the orchestral concert and the three-course meal of the orchestral concert. You knew where you were. The structure was there, and you felt safe. You felt secure. You felt upheld. You were curious. You wanted to know what was going to happen next. Yeah, that was the beginning for me.
If I may.
Yeah, so
So, perhaps a question which you may have been asked.
Give a microphone. There should be several more.
So first, a confession. I understand absolutely nothing technical about orchestra, but I love listening to it. So I'm here very often, and I'm going to be for the next 4 shows also. Having said that, observing my own behavior and how I've cultivated a preference for it, and being from the marketing field where we have now evidence-based research that music is one of the best identifiers for brands to use, if you want to get a consumer to recall a brand. And connecting these two things together, in your experience, as time has changed, how have all these other philharmonics managed to retain consumers? How do they get the youngsters to come in and perhaps be as enthralled and as loyal to keep visiting, again and again? I would like to see that, for the Symphony Orchestra of India also.
very interesting question. Firstly, there's no shortage of young talent in music, as there is in athletics. And in athletics, you will see that there are young people who are breaking records every single year. And things that were impossible, that speeds of running and many other physical feats that were considered impossible, the next generation always takes them that big forward. So the young people who are coming through the schools and then through the conservatories, God help us, they play so well. I mean, some of them are playing better than the virtuosos of 50, 100 years ago. They are so good, they are so skilled, and they are so keen. And so we have now a tremendous upsurge of talent. I mentioned China, Korea, even more so. In Korea, being a musician is a signifier of status.
Yeah.
Isaac Stern once said to me, he said, when I was growing up in San Francisco, you played in the orchestra, you were a poison. It meant you could walk down the street and people doffed their hat to you because you were a musician and you were given the status by being a member of an orchestra. Not necessarily a concertmaster. You could be somewhere at the back, but you were a member of an orchestra and you were something to aspire towards, and you were something of which the society was able to preen itself and to say, we are a good society. We are a society that aims for better and higher things. And that's what we're seeing now in many countries, particularly in Korea, where but practically every year we're seeing a new virtuosic pianist coming through. The pianism is phenomenal. The orchestras are improving. And Korea, South Korea, has chosen to identify itself by its orchestras in the way that China did 50 years ago. So it's all to play for.
And for the audiences, how do these philharmonics get newer audiences, younger audiences, you would say?
It's a mixture of the two things that I mentioned. It's first of all this nebulous idea of aspiration and excellence and making a better society through working together in an orchestra. And it's the notion of star quality, of having something that is just that bit more glittering than the mundane lives of most citizens. So in Seoul, when there is a new record released by Yoon Chan Lim, for instance, who won the Van Cliven competition last year. People queue all night to be the first to have his record, and then they queue again all day to get his autograph. That kind of identification with a notion of being better, being bigger than what you thought you could possibly be, and being part of a story of greatness. Yeah, that's how you get people to come. That's how you get them to relate. And once they're there, not everybody's going to like it. Some people will be bored. Some people will talk. But some will find that their lives have been changed.
Yes. In fact, Norman, there's a reverse story told to me a long time ago. There was the first oboe of the Philadelphia. What was his name? He was very famous.
John Delancey.
John Delancey,
Yeah.
yes. And he was the one who was dismissed. Not John Delancey, it was somebody.
No.
Marcel Tabuto or somebody.
Oh, yes. The Frenchman, yes.
And he did something wrong, and Stokowski removed him. Although he's meant to be one of the greatest oboe players in the world. And he apparently walked around the Philadelphia Hall almost every day because it was the greatest social insult to be removed from the orchestra.
Right.
He walked around it, etc., and eventually committed suicide. That was the importance of his job. And we've heard many stories like this, that in the Vienna Philharmonic, the grandfather, the father, and the father play.
That's
and
right.
the grandsons play
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
And sometimes they have the same instrument.
Yeah.
And if one of the grandsons doesn't measure up to the standards that the others decide, he is almost a social outcast.
Yeah.
It's that important.
Yeah.
Now, it's so in the industry of India, we have the Tatas and the Tatas and the Tatas, and the builders and the builders, etc. It was that important in the orchestras or in the musical firmament, whatever kind.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that
I say something. Hello, everybody. It's Martin Brabbins here. Thank you. Thank you, Norman, for your wonderful talk. And it's incredibly impressive, isn't it, to see the number of books you've written. I've written a chapter of a book, and it was purgatory. So one thing, it's this lady's question has sparked my interest. Today we rehearsed the planets for tomorrow's concert. We spent an hour and a half to 11:30, and in the hall with us were between 200 and 300 children, aged between 8 and 15. And I have to say, they really listened. I talked to the audience. We explained a little bit about what the music was about, and I gave them a little guided tour of the sections of the orchestra. And I think one of the things we have to do as musicians is reach out to young people. And that kind of exercise that we did today is so important. And probably we should do it more often. Bianca, if you're here listening, we should arrange it more often. But that then connects to, again, work that Marat and his team do here with the Academy of the Symphony Orchestra of India, the young musicians who are trained by members of the orchestra throughout the year. As Norman just said, you of those 200 or 300 children that were with us today, maybe 5 of them will become either musicians or supporters of music and the Symphony Orchestra of India. Every child, I was going to say, in India kicks a football, but probably every child in India probably hits a cricket ball, more importantly. Yeah. In the UK, every child gets to kick a football, but they don't get the opportunities to play music. The opportunities for education in the UK and probably here are less for music than we would wish they were. So we have to get them when they're young. We really have to get them when they're young. Not so that they necessarily become great musicians, but so they become
Yes.
infected by the magic of music. And I'm looking forward to Sunday going to my first international cricket match.
Martin, I don't know whether you know, but when Mike Brearley was captain of England, and he would be batting against Lillian Thompson, which was no fun. They were the fastest things on earth. And the Australians in the slips would be giving him all manner of sledging and questioning his parentage and his physical attributes and everything else. And they were, going at him in the way that only Aussies can. And they saw that his lips were moving. They couldn't hear what was coming from him. I mean, they thought, well, he's probably slagging us back. But he wasn't. He was humming the opening bar of the Second Razumovsky Quartet by Beethoven, because that's what kept him focused. That's what kept his mind on what he had to do when he was in fear of his life from the missiles that were being hurled at him from the other end. That's what music can do. It is a refuge, and it is something that lifts us out of ourselves. And the more that we can give this to other people, share it with other people, especially young people, it's there. It's there for all to share.
Yes. There's a wonderful story about the great Australian Don Bradman. And he was very quiet before he came out to bat. Didn't mix with anybody. He was actually listening to Beethoven on his radio. That was a story that he told Sunil Gavaskar himself. The other amazing story of the power of music to inspire people is what Carl Böhm once said, that he was conducting, I think, something by Brahms or Beethoven. And the orchestra was playing well, as usually they did for him. But he suddenly found some sort of a spark or some sort of a little sun rising in the orchestra, and they all wondered what was happening. Furtwängler had just walked into the hall, and the players, having seen him, rose to a different height. Do you believe that can happen?
Yeah, we've seen it,
It's
haven't we?
an amazing
We've
thing,
seen
yes.
it. Yeah, we've seen it.
Yeah. And there are so many stories of that kind.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So much of what I think I know about writing, I probably absorbed from reading Neville Cardis's cricket reports in The Guardian. I was a cricket fanatic. And he was, of course, also their music critic. So it was easy to shift from one to the other. You read music, you read critic.
Yeah.
Your life was complete.
We all recommend his book. It's called A Composer's 11.
Yes.
Wonderful book.
I think.
I'd like to ask.
Oh, lady.
Speaking of Neville Cardis. Do you want to use the mic? Thank you. Speaking of Neville Cardis, have you read his book, The Composer's 11?
Yes.
That's what I just said.
Now,
Yeah.
isn't it amazing that in that book, he does not choose Beethoven, Mozart, and some other great composer, maybe Brahms, I forget. He chooses a whole lot of others.
Yes.
And at one stage, I thought he was choosing them because of their cricket positions. Can you imagine? And then it wasn't that. It was just that he felt that those were the people he should choose as his composer's 11. Do you have any views on that? Why or what made him do it?
I remember he didn't choose Beethoven, but then, goodness, how do you pick a cricket team without Bradman?
Well, that's because I think Beethoven was a better composer than any cricketer that came. So he didn't choose him in the first 11.
But he was, Cardis was such an educator. Cardis constantly told you things, if he's describing a performance or he's describing a cricket match, that simple things that you never realized before. It just opened your eyes.
Yes.
Norman, think you mentioned, and Martin just mentioned, the kids in the rehearsal this morning, and you remarked about how wonderfully disciplined they were and how attentive they were. And I think this is a very important thing also which an orchestra can bring. Most of our lives now we have noise, music, activity. It's one of the few places where you actually have a collective silence, where you can have 1,000, 2,000 people, 500 people, all just concentrating and listening. And the classic, whatever the phrase is, that music starts with silence and ends with silence, I think that's also a very, very important quality that we need to impart to young people who are surrounded by noise of one sort or another in their whole lives. And the other thing I would say is that my experience, again, going back some time, is that younger people are much more receptive to music that a lot of us older people find difficult. Contemporary music. It's not contemporary. It's not difficult for them. It's wonderful sounds which are there to be played by great orchestras to younger people who are very receptive, I think. And perhaps we ought to do more of that for the younger people.
Yeah. It's we create too many barriers, we create too many categories. And many of these categories were invented for marketing purposes. But music is music is music is music.
Can I? I think Woody Allen in one of his movies said that when he listened to Wagner, it made him want to rush out and conquer Poland. So what I wanted to ask is, do you think music has a dark side to it?
Yeah.
And that there are aspects of music that bring out martial and a military nature? And a lot of people have blamed Wagner for being responsible for a lot of the militaristic aspects of the Third Reich and anti-Semitism, etc. And of course, the Israel didn't play him for many years. So what are your thoughts on that?
How long have we got?
Yes.
Till World War III.
I'm glad you mentioned World War III, because The Planets was written during World War I and premiered in the middle of World War I. So when you hear the militarism of the opening movement, it is reflecting a daily reality. This is the news. People who heard that for the first time in Royal Albert Hall, it wasn't the Queen's Hall, heard it for the first time in the Royal Albert Hall, knew what they were listening to. They were listening to what was going on just across the water in the Somme. It must have been terrifying for them. Music is an aspect of human behavior. There is good behavior, there is bad behavior. There are good sides to our character, there are evil sides to our character. So music has to be conditioned by one of those. But I've never, as far as I'm aware, in the history of music, have people gone rushing out of a concert hall or an opera house wanting to start a riot or to kill their fellow human beings. It doesn't work that way. It literally doesn't work that way. Music instills different feelings and emotions and motives in us, but it doesn't want to make us kill our fellow human beings. Wagner bears a heavy weight of responsibility for the ideology that became Nazism. He effectively legitimized anti-Semitism as a political weapon. It had been disreputable before. It was considered a fringe, and Wagner made it culturally acceptable. That is his specific responsibility. But again, contrary to Woody Allen, nobody ever came out of Tristan and invaded Poland. Nobody ever came out of a Wagner opera except in a sense of deep self-contemplation and also contemplation of where our world is going, where our society is going, and what my role, your role, needs to be in that society. So it may contain elements that are from the darker side, but it doesn't make us want to do the darker things. Unless somebody's going to tell me otherwise.
In fact, when Barenboim and Mehta wanted to play Wagner in in Tel Aviv, the orchestra was rather worried as to the reaction because there were still people with marks on their thing. And they did play, and a section of the audience stood up and sang the Hatikva right through the thing, but the orchestra finished last. And they got an ovation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is a great compliment to their taste,
Yeah.
rather than to their prejudices. In fact, there's a funny story when you think, apart from all this, of Neville Cardus. He was watching a cricket match at the Braven Stadium against the West Indies. The Indians were playing, and a very famous Indian cricketer, I won't name him, was facing the awful Gilchrist, who was a killer, absolutely. Fastest bowler in the world. And as he was approaching, this gentleman was retreating. And at last, when he came in at tea time, he said, "My dear Gonzo, if you'd retreated any further, you would have run over the leg umpire." Yeah.
In 1954, Yasha Heifetz was in Israel, and a Holocaust survivor tried to assault him because he was playing the Richard Strauss sonata.
Yeah.
And Strauss had been, at one time, an official of the Nazi government. He was head of the Reichsmusikkammer. And there were people who'd lost all of their families to the Nazis, and they had engendered great hostility. And he was protected, he wasn't injured, but he said, "I'd never play her again. I'm out of here, I'm gone." And the cellist, Piatigorsky, persuaded him gently over the years, "Go once more, go." And it just so happened that I was there in the hall, 1972. He played in Jerusalem, and he played the Strauss Sonata. And Golda Meir led the whole of her cabinet out to sit in the front row as a statement to say, music is not about politics. Music is about something else. We need to separate it from politics. We need to appreciate it for what it is. As it happened, Golda's son was a musician, so was the son of Abba Evan, the foreign minister. But Heifetz was able to play to the entire government as a way of identifying the inviolability of music, that music can exist outside of our daily pressures, outside of the daily noise that Ed mentioned, that it is our place of safety.
I wonder what a C was. I did see it. Darius, you're amazingly quiet. Here's one of our most knowledgeable couples sitting here, a former judge of the High Court, and Darius, our Advocate General, who knows more about music than certainly I do. And they're very quiet. Roynton.
No, we've learned a lot. Exactly. Maybe we could ask you one question.
Yes.
What is the legend behind the Arthur Nikisch ring?
The legend behind the Arthur Nikisch ring.
I mean, you know that it's been awarded to various conductors.
Oh, yes.
The
Vienna Philharmonic awarded.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yes. So there were two. The first ring at Bayreuth was performed in 1876. This year is the 150th anniversary. And the conductor, by this time, Wagner had given up conducting. He didn't want to be involved in. I mean, he was a phenomenal conductor in his own right, but he delegated it. And his conductor for the ring in Bayreuth was Hans Richter.
No, my question is a little different.
Yeah, I know.
Physical ring, yes.
Yeah. There is an actual physical ring.
The ring,
So I don't know if this is connected, but the conductor was Hans Richter, and the concertmaster was Arthur Nikisch. He was playing first violin. Nikish Richter was very dismissive of Nikish. Richter would say Richter would say I'm German, and he's German Hungarian. You know, he looked down on him, and so Nikish in some way or other had to express himself in a more assertive way. Did he actually have a ring that he was playing in Bayreuth that then became the ring that was?
There was a physical ring.
A physical, yes, I'm saying it was
Nikish,
actually right, and
which symbolized the German-Austrian conductorship tradition.
right,
And Karl
right.
Böhm held it. till his death.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
The Vienna Philharmonic awarded it to Zubin Mehta.
Right, okay,
And it's done at a big ceremony.
right,
It was awarded in 1981.
okay,
The president of Austria actually giving it to him.
okay.
Yes, yes.
And he wears it?
Apparently, he's the holder of that ring.
He's the holder of the Nikish ring. Wow, that's a wonderful thing.
Because every time we see him, we'll say, ah, do.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he does. He has it.
Norman, over here, if you can see me. There are actually over 50 symphony orchestras in India, but you won't recognize them because they play Carnatic and Hindustani. So the question for you is, and probably for your next book, fusion of these musics into the Western format. Have you thought about that? And can you incorporate them into the sessions that you have here next 4 or 5?
That's very difficult. That's very difficult. Music exists within its own systems and within its own tonalities. How does one fuse Chinese music, which is pentatonic, founded on 5 tones, with Western music, which is founded on 8 or 12 tones? They have to coexist in some way, but if you were to fuse them, you would create cacophony. I don't know enough about Carnatic music and about the various modes and tropes, but I imagine, or indeed the instruments, it is developed in a different tradition, and that tradition needs to assert its independence. But I have no doubt at all that what happens in a Carnatic orchestra is not that much different from what happens in a symphony orchestra, which is the collective pursuit of individual excellence that goes on within this organism, and that the organism is then able to represent an aspiration to the whole of society. I mean, there is no telling where it can and where it might go.
Will that be a topic in your next book?
Oh, maybe the next one but one. But there is a man I've been in touch with recently in Nashville, Tennessee, who wrote a song called That Old Atonal Music My Daddy Used to Love. And it's a fabulous song. And in the middle of it, one of his musicians picks up a banjo and plays a perfect 12-note row on a banjo. I mean, Schoenberg would have felt vindicated.
But the sound of our Indian music instruments is so different that to meld it into a symphonic sound would require considerable skill, I think. To hear the sort of sound that a sitar makes or another instrument makes. There is a sitar concerto, of course, written by Ravi Shankar. There are things, but I don't know whether it really melts.
It doesn't.
I don't know what the audience thinks, but it's a very difficult task. Yes, the tabla concerto is because the tabla is not a melodic instrument, and he did make it a success. But somehow or the other, it's like playing 6 footballers and cricketers in a mixed match. And I don't know whether they want to hit sixes or score goes. There's no real, I don't see a great affinity. I hope I'm wrong.
These are things that must be kept separate. I mean, you can't.
Yeah.
There are foods that you can't eat together; they clash.
That's
and
right.
you can't serve them together. One of the worst pieces you'll ever hear is the Egyptian Concerto by Saint-Saëns.
Oh.
Saint-Saëns is a fabulous composer, but he's trying to meld Arabic music into
It
a
was
Western
awful.
concerto. It's awful.
Yeah.
So just on that note, right back at me, this side actually. In fact, I heard Rakesh Charasia ji and Ustad Zakir Hussain perform with the symphony orchestra. I think it was 2 years back or 3 years back. And obviously not in the same, it was a symphony, our symphony orchestra, but they were a part of the production. And I thought the cohesion was lovely. So I understand the point you make that in following the traditions of orchestra, maybe, different music genre, no, I don't know what I want to say, but different, like Carnatic or Hindustani may not fit in, but presenting it thoughtfully, I thought the SOI did it beautifully when I heard it. So that's my memory of, of two different genres coming together. That was on our stage.
I think there are certain things that most musical forms have in common, and the basis of them is structure, which is dictated by rhythm. And I first learnt to listen to Arabic music from a girlfriend who just opened my ears to the way that the opening statement of an Kulthum song, which could go on for 2.5 hours, the opening statement gave you the musical recognition and the rhythmic recognition that made you feel comfortable in a work whose language you didn't know and whose musical language was unfamiliar, but you could sit comfortably for 2.5 hours and indeed be stimulated for 2.5 hours because the structure had been given to you in the opening, and it's not that different from the structure of a Bruckner symphony, where you know he's going to go off at all sorts of tangents and you're going to be sitting there for an hour or 80 minutes. But because the opening statement is so clear and so lucid, you are going to enjoy and be intrigued by what follows. I think that's one of, in the various forms of music that I know, I think that's one of the things that holds us together in humanity.
What do the players who've come to play with us think about the progress of music here with the orchestra? Would you like to say something? Let's ask them.
Well, first of all, it's been a wonderful pleasure to see the orchestra in such fabulous health, and to have so many different nationalities of music coming together and working together, and most of all to see the number of Indian musicians and Kazakh musicians within the orchestra. That's absolutely fabulous. As the marketing lady was talking earlier, one of the things I had hoped to do was to work with some young people, and I know I'm not alone in that, in the orchestra, that when we come and visit a community, it's one of the great joys is to work with the young people, and I hope that the Academy and any youth orchestras, we have a very strong tradition of that in England and in Australia as well, where I live now. And that's so important, because I remember there was a wonderful lady, Nadia Boulanger, who, when I was young, she used to come to a school I was at, and she used to say, it's a little bit like sport. If you have a go at it yourself, when you watch it on the television or you see professionals do it, you understand and you have a connection with it. I'm sure like your young cricketers do, and they go to see the matches. And if you have a go at it yourself as a musician, you have a go at playing an instrument, when you go to see an orchestra, it says something. It's about not about standards. And what I would love to see the orchestra doing, I'm so excited to play the concerts, but we must always think we want to build audiences. And if you have some understanding of that, it brings such joy, as Norman has spoken so wonderfully and informatively tonight. It's been such a pleasure to hear you talk. So I'm so thrilled to be here. So thank you to Martin and the orchestra for the opportunity, and I'm so excited to see how it will grow throughout the seasons ahead.
Making a point about the importance of a symphony orchestra when we can attract players of the caliber of these wonderful musicians. And we are attracting good players now.
Yes, and how? There is something almost subversive in what we do and what we represent, because we've lived through a generation of false egalitarianism in which ideals and aspirations have been flattened out and dumbed down. And I was once deplatformed in an American university for using the word excellence. You can't say that. That's elitist.
Yeah.
What are we as human beings if we don't aspire to excellence? What are we if we don't challenge ourselves every day to do something better than the day before? Whoever we are and in whatever field we happen to be living and working. And what we do in music is that every day to be better than the day before. So we are the counter-revolutionary force. We are the force that enables us to connect to a past that was all growth and ignore the propaganda of false egalitarianism and enable us to be better people, better society, and to enjoy ourselves more.
May I just say something? The Norman invasion of England took place 1,000 years ago. The Norman invasion of India has taken place today.
Oh, wow. There's Royalton with his wonderful wit. Well done, Royalton.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I knew something was coming. Still an hour for dinner. So any more questions, or would you like to conclude, or whatever you felt should have been said and not said?
Thank you for being such a wonderful audience. It's when you stand on a stage and you've got lights shining into your eyes and you're trying to engage with people, it's not always easy, but
Can we do something about that?
Oh, no, don't worry about it. Don't worry, I'm used to it. But the feeling that I had from you, coming back from you, is this really urgent desire to engage with music and to see how music can engage with you. It's a reciprocal relationship. It's the best kind of reciprocity. And whether you're doing it as a musician or as a listener or as a writer or as an organizer or as a donor, a sponsor, a funder, whatever it is, you know that this is a part of your life that you will never regret. And so thank you for being such a wonderful audience.
Thank you very much, Norman.